Welcome back to another reaction video, and of course The Chosen Season 2 Episode 7 premiered for me recording this last night and for you also last night, so I hope that you've had an opportunity to check that out, and let's get right to it. We'll do a summary, we'll talk about a few weaknesses, and then a list of strengths for this episode. So as we begin, we see the camera focused in on a notice nailed to a door. And as a Lutheran, of course, that catches my attention because we're kind of well known for notices nailed to doors, if you know what I mean. But this notice isn't a good notice. Jesus is wanted for questioning. So we begin to see the enemies of Jesus that we've seen kind of all over the place. We see those enemies of Jesus begin to come together. So the Pharisees are looking for Jesus. The Romans are looking for Jesus. And the Pharisees want to make sure the Romans are going after Jesus for the right things. They don't want their whole plan to come unraveled because the Romans are going after Jesus for something that like they think he's a zealot or something like this. They want their plan to come together as well. We also find out who the man who had kind of been stalking around earlier. His name is Atticus. He's a Roman personal detective. So again, looking for Jesus, trying to figure out what's going on. We see the return of Quintus. So it was good to see him back. His character is very, very good for this series. Really adds tension without necessarily anger and antagonism. He really wants control over the situation, and you can tell. So he's a really good character to have around. We see Simon and Andrew and James and John, the two sets of brothers, in a rock throwing contest. So perhaps the way we may think about the who's the greatest discussion, even though this isn't necessarily the way that plays out, but in the first century, but they're together, and I really like that these four are together because we do see these four specifically called out as being together in the Gospels. In Mark chapter 13, the very beginning of that, when they're trying to figure out about the destruction of the temple and the signs about the destruction of the temple, it's these four who are called out as specifically being together. So that's kind of a nice touch there. And the episode comes together. We see that Jesus is preparing for the Sermon on the Mount, right? He's kind of been preparing for that before, and that's really where the season, it seems, is going to wrap up with the Sermon on the Mount. We see Shmuel return, and he's apparently gaining some honor. The Pharisees he goes in to see wants to give him this seat of honor, and the scriptures talk about this as well. And I mentioned before, I kind of got the sense that he's beginning to question this whole thing, or maybe second guess his involvement. I don't see so much of that going on here, except for one thing, and we'll see how this plays out with him. He specifically rejects the seat of honor. And again, we'll see how this plays out. I'm wondering if this is because of the urgency of his message, or if this is playing into some of his second guessing, right? Because Jesus will condemn specifically the scribes for taking the seats of honor in the synagogue, right? And he condemns that. So we'll see how this plays out. I'm interested in this. Simon and Andrew are fishing on the sea. It's nice to see that they kind of are still in their normal vocation as the days go on, and they're arguing like brothers. So you can really appreciate this about Simon and Andrew arguing like brothers and fishing in their normal vocation. And they think, especially Andrew, that the sermon, the upcoming sermon, is the climax of the ministry. So there's this lack of understanding there, which I'll get more to in just a minute. We see Gaius. Remember, he and Matthew had a very close-knit relationship. We see him with Jesus, and then Romans start showing up everywhere. Jesus ensures that ensures Gaius that Matthew is safe, right? So this is a nice touch. The testimony of Jesus is going public all over the place. Andrew is trying to stop it, so we see some conflict with Andrew here. Jesus is questioned by Quintus. Quintus, again, wanting control, doesn't really know what to think about this Jesus. He even makes a comment, look, it seems like we're on the same team here, but not the way I really want. And then Quintus also with this final jab as a Roman, telling Jesus, sorry about your cousin. So we'll kind of see this John the Baptizer, not only arrest, but death and beheading play out kind of behind the scenes, and the disciples ultimately getting that news. So at the very end of the episode, we're introduced to a new person who is a follower of Nicodemus. He's being very secretive. They call him Yusuf. So I'm wondering, and this may have been clarified in comments, if this is going to be Joseph of Arimathea. It would be really nice to see him and Nicodemus together, kind of being these secret disciples of Jesus along the way. So the stage is set for the Sermon on the Mount to conclude season 2. We see Jesus wake up Matthew to get him ready for those details of the sermon. So that's the way kind of the episode goes along season 2, episode 7. As far as weaknesses of the episode are concerned, I'm still kind of, and I know, with 4 gospel accounts, unless you're sticking with one specifically, the timeline is gonna kind of get out of line. Especially, Mark really isn't concerned with a timeline early on, at least in his gospel. Of course, John isn't one of the synoptics, so he's kind of doing his own thing. But I'm confused as to the timeline, because the Sermon on the Mount is recorded in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and things like the paralytic coming down through the roof have already taken place, which happens in Matthew 9. So not so much a weakness as much as it is, worth noting. And I get it. You've got to work around some of those things. A comment about the Pharisees walking around in black and white, and I'm thinking, hey, some of my commenters don't need any help here, so I'll hold back on some of that next time. But in all seriousness, not so much a weakness, but this is the only thing that I'll really mention about this episode, and it has more to do with a missed opportunity from my perspective. And that's when Jesus is detained by the Romans. He asks if he can tell his mother goodbye, and he hugs her, and he says to her, "Don't be afraid, Emma." And Mary will kind of grab at her chest, right? Remember Simeon in the temple with the infant Jesus, when Simeon says, "Lord, now let your servant depart in peace, your word has been fulfilled." And he continues, and then he tells Mary, "And a sword will pierce through your own soul also." And this is a reference to the crucifixion. So Mary is grabbing at her chest as if, almost like, is this the sword? The missed opportunity for me comes where Jesus could have said, "Don't be afraid, Emma. My hour has not yet come." Okay? Pulling in some of this John-like language, because all the way through John's gospel, my hour has not yet come. Wedding at Cana, for instance, my hour has not yet come. This, for me, would have been a nice touch to say, "Don't be afraid, Emma. My hour has not yet come." But that's really it for the episode. Not so many weaknesses per se, but but just a few notes, we'll say. As far as strengths, wow, I really liked this episode. It's one of my favorites so far. It's really what I expect, from the show. Kind of this, and I've mentioned it before. Kind of these backstories from people who aren't necessarily biblical, but kind of creating their stories and seeing it all come together. Okay, all the details, like Jesus cueing Matthew for the details of the sermon, right? Matthew's the only one who will document this sermon in full. I love the tension and the conflict and the conspiring, right? These are the things that we see in the Gospels as Jesus goes along and as word begins to spread, right? The scriptures will mention, and the Pharisees, go off to do this or to do that. And we really get to see some of that in this episode. So I like that. I like seeing Simon and Andrew fishing. It's their normal vocation. That's what they're doing. It's their normal work. We see Jesus' compassion for Gaius as he tells him that Matthew is okay. Super, super important. Because in the Gospels, we will see Jesus say things like, I have come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. At the same time, he's healing a centurion servant. So he is kind of looking out then for the Romans as well. So to see this compassion for Gaius is a nice touch. The one kind of character development that we see is specifically with Andrew, and we start seeing Andrew having these outbursts, almost Peter-like outbursts. And people may think this is out of place, but it's really not, because Andrew knows of John's arrest, and Andrew had been there with John. And, we don't know how much more he knows at this point, but, death for John is imminent, if not have already happened. So, Andrew could really be dealing with grief here, not only with John, but as he's seen Jesus be carried off, is it about to happen with Jesus too? So you can kind of see his world come crashing down upon him all over again. And again, something that's accurate here in Jesus's conversation with Quintus. Quintus really just dislikes the crowd of people, the influx of people into these cities, because there's always the potential with the influx of people for some sort of uprising, some sort of chaos or rioting, and he doesn't need that. He doesn't need Caesar on his case for a disruption in the land. So he really needs to understand who Jesus is and what he's after. Is he another one of these people stirring things up to get people ready for war? What is his goal? He needs to know who he is and what his intentions are, because if the Romans are right at this point, if Jesus is a zealot, that's a problem for them. So Quintus needs to know for sure who he is. And then he asks the question to Jesus, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And that's a powerful question to ask Jesus. In the Gospels, we see Jesus withdrawing for prayer all the time. So, again, not so much the biblical stuff, right? But things hinting toward the biblical stuff. And maybe that's why I like this episode so much, because for me it accomplishes more of what the creator of the series is wanting people to do, to get them to the scriptures. So laying these things out there gets people to the scriptures, and they can see more of this start to play out. So I really, really like this. A few more strengths. At the very end of the episode, Jesus walks back up, and they're almost shocked to see him. And all he says is, "Did I not tell you that I'd be back?" Right? Trust the word. And this will come into play at the resurrection of Jesus too. Because in his passion predictions, the 3 passion predictions, he will say in increasing detail what's going to happen to him, but he'll always say that he will rise again on the 3rd day. But the disciples don't so much act like that as they're locked away in the upper room, right? Did I not tell you that I'd be back? Trust the word of Jesus. This will also be important as he seems to admit to them that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard for them, as he says something at the end, like, who does he say it to? Nathaniel, where he says, no promises about it being easy. And they'll hit that head on. I hope they follow up with this in maybe at the end of season 2, but especially in season 3, where the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Well, Matthew 10, Jesus specifically addresses the disciples and says, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Okay, so it's not going to be easy for them, and Jesus kind of lays the groundwork for that right here. So that's that. I really enjoyed this episode. I hope that you did too. What did you think about it? What are some of your favorite scenes? What are some of your favorite quotes from the characters? What did you think of seeing Quintus again? Comment those things down below. The season 2 finale is coming up next, and then we'll wait patiently for season 3. In the meantime, as we wait for season 3, check out some of the other things on the channel. I've got a series where I go through one of the texts from the historic lectionary. Right now, this church year, we're going through the epistle. Next church year, when Advent comes around again, we will be looking at the gospel. Those go up almost weekly. Not one this week, but they'll start coming back in the next week. And also, as we wait for season 3, also comment some things down below you'd like to see reacted to or reviewed in the meantime as we wait. So, again, hope you enjoyed the episode. Great to see you again, and we'll see you next time.